Prince William visits a school for blind kids. One girl's question leaves him speechless. The school sat quietly on the edge of the English countryside, surrounded by trees older than most of the staff inside. It wasn't grand or decorated, with banners. No cameras waited, no red carpet rolled out. Just a simple building with peeling paint, soft footsteps in the halls, and the gentle clack of canes against tile. Inside, teachers moved like clockwork, smiles a little too wide, hands nervously adjusting sleeves and collars. They'd been told to prepare, but how do you prepare for royalty in a place that doesn't pretend to be more than it is? The children, most of them blind or visually impaired, weren't buzzing with the same nerves. They couldn't see the fancy cars pulling up. They didn't know what Prince William looked like, but they could feel the shift in the air, the hush, the pause, the silent alert that something unusual was happening. Then the cars arrived. Black, gleaming, quiet. Not many. Not loud. Just enough to signal presence. Prince William stepped out, alone. No grand speech, no press. Just a calm presence in a navy coat, walking toward the entrance like he'd been here before. He moved with purpose, but not the kind that rushes. He didn't scan the building. He looked at people. Not down at them. At them. Inside, the teachers guided him gently through the hallway. But he didn't just pass by. He stopped at every corner, every classroom. Not to shake hands and move on, but to kneel. To listen. "Hello," he said to one child crouching beside a boy with his fingers tracing raised letters. "What are you reading?" The boy smiled. "Dinosaurs. Big ones. Those are the best kind," William said with a nod. Another child reached, out instinctively. William met his hand halfway. "You've got strong hands," he said softly. With each child he paused, not out of duty, but as if these moments were the reason he came. He didn't try to inspire. He just showed up fully. Then, at the end of the corridor, stood Amina. She held her white cane close to her side, one foot slightly turned inward. Her uniform was crisp, her expression unreadable. She didn't fidget. She didn't smile. She simply waited. William approached without hesitation. He lowered himself once again, resting one knee on the cool tile floor. "Hello there," he said, voice steady. Amina turned her head slightly, not quite toward him, but close enough. "Are you the man they've been whispering about all morning?" "I suppose I am," he said with a quiet smile. "Okay," she replied. Just that. And somehow it was enough. Something about her voice, the calm, the certainty settled into him. Around them, the school was still. No interruptions. Just one girl and one man, meeting at the same height. She didn't ask for anything, didn't rush. But then she tilted her head and asked a question that no one, not even him, was ready for. A question so gentle yet so unexpected, it would stop the room and leave a prince speechless. The room had quieted, not by command, but by something softer. Curiosity mixed with reverence. Prince William sat among the children in the circle, cross-legged on a small cushion. The sleeves of his coat rolled up just enough to show he wasn't here as a symbol, but as someone willing to be part of their world. A few questions had come, already. One child asked if he had ever ridden a horse that could talk. Another asked if his house was really shaped like a castle. William answered them all with ease and warmth, chuckles slipping between his replies. But then Amina raised her hand. Her voice was so quiet that even the air seemed to stop moving. "What does the sky look like?" she asked. That was all. 6 words, not loud, not dramatic, but they changed everything. The teachers froze. A few blinked hard. One instinctively reached for a tissue. Even the children, usually so quick to giggle or fidget, sat absolutely still. William looked at Amina. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't joking. She asked not for curiosity's sake, but because she had never seen it. And maybe no one had ever truly told her. He didn't answer right away. He took a breath. One slow, thoughtful breath. Then gently, he began. "It changes," he said. "Sometimes it's soft blue, like the inside of a dream. Sometimes it's wild and loud, with dark clouds running like waves. And sometimes," he paused, glancing at the window though he knew she couldn't follow his gaze. "Sometimes it's quiet, Just a pale color that doesn't say anything at all. But you feel it. You feel it pressing over you, in the way the air wraps around your shoulders. Amina tilted her head slightly. William continued, softer now. When the sun sets, it bleeds into orange and pink, like warm paint spilled on cold water. And when it rains, it hides behind gray, but it's still there. Always. There. He leaned just a little closer, voice like a secret. It's endless, like a quiet promise you can't quite touch. The room hadn't moved. Amina reached out with one hand, letting it rest in the space between them. Not to be held, just to feel. She smiled then, not wide, but deep. The kind of smile that rises from somewhere below the heart. Then maybe I've felt it after all, she whispered. William blinked. For a moment he didn't know what to say. But he didn't need to. That single sentence had filled the silence better than any answer ever could. And as he looked at her, he realized something else. This visit wouldn't be about what he gave them, but what one girl had just given back. And just like that, the next question in his heart wasn't how to lead, but how to listen. William sat quietly in a small room lined with shelves of worn books and textured learning tools. The noise of the hallway had faded, replaced by the soft ticking of a clock, and the distant sound of children laughing somewhere beyond the walls. But his mind wasn't in the room. Not fully. Amina's question echoed back louder than any royal ceremony ever had. What does the sky look like? He rested his hands in his lap, fingers clasped, eyes fixed on the carpeted floor. The question wasn't just about the sky. It was about everything he had never needed to explain. Everything he had taken for granted. Things he assumed the world simply knew. The head teacher, a kind woman named Miriam, sat across from him holding a warm mug of tea that had gone untouched. She sensed something lingering in him, something deeper than a thoughtful pause. They don't see faces, she said gently, but they hear tones. They notice pauses. They feel the way a person enters a room. That's how they know who's kind. William nodded slowly. He looked around the room, the raised alphabet posters, the tactile maps, the braille labels on every surface. It was another world, one built on senses he'd never had to rely on, but it was no less rich. They don't see me as a prince, do they? He asked softly. Miriam smiled. No, Your Royal Highness. They see you as someone who listened. It was humbling and freeing. In a world that always saw his title before his name, here was a room full of children who couldn't care less about crowns or cameras. They saw what truly mattered. He remembered his mother. Not just her image, but her words. Be with the people who are never seen. Let them know they matter. That had always stayed with him. Diana had walked into places others ignored, hugged hands others avoided. And now, her son was sitting in a classroom that felt far from the palace but closer to truth than anything lined with gold. He looked toward the small window, faint light filtering in. She made me stop, William said, almost to himself. Not with her voice, with her heart. Miriam tilted her head. Amina? He nodded. She doesn't know what the sky looks like, he said. But she made me see it clearer than ever. There was silence again, but this time it was warm. Shared. Not empty. In that moment, William didn't feel like a public figure or a representative of the crown. He felt like a man learning again what it meant to be human. She gave me something I can't name, he added. Sometimes, Miriam said gently, the things that can't be seen are the ones we carry the longest. William smiled, just slightly. He hadn't expected to be changed today. But something had shifted, not just in thought, but in feeling.
And as he walked out of that room, he knew the next step wouldn't be about wanting just to see. Always a first goal like a quit. Faintly hers this confident.
Sure, she didn't need to see to know where she was. Every turn, every texture, every creak of the floor told her a story. Her friends laughed nearby, guiding her without guiding, because Amina never liked to be led. She liked to walk beside. In class, her fingers moved swiftly over the braille lines of a book about stars. She couldn't see the sky, but she felt it through words, through stories her father used to whisper at bedtime when the world outside was still and uncertain. He had come from far away, from a land where bombs spoke louder than dreams. But every night, He gave her verses lines of poetry instead of lullabies. "You are not broken," he would tell her. "You are written in light." At 5 years old, the illness had come quickly. One week, she was tracing the shapes of clouds, through windows. The next, she saw only shadows. But even as the light left her eyes, it found a new place to grow in her heart, in her voice, in the way she listened. She could tell when her teacher was tired, just by the way her footsteps sounded. She knew when her best friend Layla was sad, even when she smiled. And when Prince William had spoken, Amina hadn't known who he was, but she'd known how he made the room feel. "He didn't sound like a prince," she told Layla that afternoon, sitting cross-legged in the garden. "He sounded kind." Layla had giggled. "But he is a prince." Amina smiled and tilted her face toward the sun. "Then maybe that's what princes should sound like." She ran her fingers along the bark of the tree beside her, learning its shape like a sculpture only she could see. The sun was warm on her cheeks, and the wind carried the faint smell of blossoms. Her imagination was a world without limits, built from sound and touch and feeling. Sometimes, her father would sit beside her with a cup of tea and teach her the verses of Hafez or Rumi. She'd memorize each one like a secret map, reciting them softly in the dark before sleep. "There's a whole sky in your mind," he once said, placing her hand on his chest. "Don't ever let the world make it small." She hadn't. Not then. Not now. And as the sun dipped behind the school's garden wall that evening, Amina felt something stir inside her. Not fear, not sadness, but wonder. Because what she didn't know was that somewhere in a royal office, a letter was being written. Not by a secretary. Not for protocol. But by a prince whose heart had been quietly rewritten. And that letter was on its way to her. She sat alone in the music room that afternoon, her fingers gliding across the page like they were tracing a quiet melody. The envelope had arrived just after lunch, white, crisp, and sealed with a golden crest that shimmered faintly beneath her touch. Amina didn't need to see it. She already knew. It was from him. She unfolded the braille letter with careful hands, as if the paper itself could fall apart under the weight of the moment. Her classmates gathered around her, not too close, not too far. Just enough to listen. The teachers stood behind them, drawn in by something none of them could name yet. Amina began to read. Not with her eyes, but with her fingers. And somehow, it felt even more alive that way. "Dear Amina," her voice was soft, steady. "You asked me about the sky, but you showed me the stars." The room went still. "I came to your school thinking I would share wisdom. Instead, I left with a heart reminded of wonder. In your silence, I heard clarity. In your courage, I saw light. You reminded me that sight is not just what the eyes carry, it's what the soul chooses to hold." Someone sniffled quietly in the back. Amina kept reading. Her voice didn't shake. "You made me remember the weight of small things. A question, a smile, a touch of a hand that can't see, but understands everything. You reminded me that leadership is not about being heard, but about listening. Deeply." The teacher beside her blinked fast, swallowing hard. A boy near the window folded his arms, not in defiance, but as if trying to hold in something bigger than himself. Amina paused for just a moment, then pressed her fingers down again. "Thank you, Amina, for your strength, for your question, for seeing the world in a way that made me see mine differently. Never forget you didn't just ask about the sky. You lifted mine." When she stopped, the room didn't move. No clapping, no whispers, just breath, just the sound of hearts learning how to stretch. She folded the letter again, slowly, and returned it to its envelope like it was something sacred. And maybe it was. A teacher wiped her eyes. Amina simply smiled small, knowing, and full. In a world that often moved too fast to notice little girls who couldn't see, this letter had found its mark. But for Prince William, one letter wasn't enough. Somewhere across the sea, plans were already beginning. Because her voice, read not in sound but in touch, had awakened something he couldn't shake. And this story wasn't finished yet. She couldn't see the letter, but what she read reshaped hearts and awakened something in a prince who thought he'd seen it all. Some dream of visiting a palace she never even imagined being invited. The envelope came in cream and gold, sealed. With a crest Amina couldn't see but could feel. Her fingers traced the embossed ridges with quiet awe. Her teacher read the words aloud slowly. "You are cordially invited to Kensington Palace." For a long moment Amina didn't say a word. Then softly, "Is it real?" Her teacher smiled. "Very real." The day of the visit came like something from a storybook. Amina wore a soft blue dress her father had pressed himself, smoothing each crease like it was a page from a prayer. He wore his best jacket, worn at the elbows but polished with care. They took the train from the countryside, Amina gripping his arm and her white cane, her heart racing at every sound. The car that picked them up from the station was long and black, the driver calm and kind. The palace gates creaked open like something ancient was waking. Inside, history whispered in the hallways. Amina's cane tapped against marble, brushed past velvet drapes, paused at rugs so soft she thought she'd stepped into air. She walked, slowly, one hand always out, reading the building like a book. "It smells like wood and old stories," she said. Her father laughed quietly beside her, his eyes damp. "You're right," he said. "It does." Prince William met them near the grand staircase. He wore no crown, no sash, just a navy suit, and a warmth that felt like sunlight. "Hello, Amina," he said gently, bending to her level. "Thank you for coming." She smiled, shy but bright. "Thank you for inviting me." He offered his arm, and they walked together through the halls. The other children listened to stories in the drawing room, but William had something else in mind. "Would you like to see the garden?" he asked. Amina nodded. "Does it smell like spring?" The garden door opened to a world of sound birds, chirping, gravel crunching, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. William guided her to a bench. "It's dusk now," he said. "The sky is turning deep purple, with streaks of gold. It's the kind of sky that doesn't last long, but you never forget it." Amina tilted her head back. "It sounds beautiful." "It is," he replied, then paused. "But not as beautiful as this moment." She smiled. "You say that like someone who really means it." "I do." They sat in silence for a while, two very different lives sharing the same stillness. It wasn't the palace walls or the polished floors that made it magical. It was being seen. It was being heard, and, as Amina stood to go, something told her this visit wasn't about royalty. It was about remembering wonder, but it wasn't the palace that left her speechless. It was what he brought out next. She stood quietly behind the podium, her hands resting on the smooth edge, as if anchoring herself to something she couldn't see but fully felt. Around her, the grand room held its breath. Royal children's event or not, today wasn't about titles. It was about voice. William had invited her personally, not as a gesture, not as charity, but as a listener. Amina tilted her head slightly as the microphone was adjusted. Her braille card rested in front of her, the tiny raised dots worn just enough to show she'd read it over and over. Then she spoke. "The sky is a song my heart can hear. It rises in the morning like a whisper. It dances behind clouds I cannot see, but I know they're there because they move me." The room stayed still, not in awkwardness, but awe, the kind of silence that wrapped itself around every syllable. "The sky is laughter when the wind brushes my face. It's the hush of night when the world feels wide. I do not see stars, but I feel the sky watching me." Listening back, her voice, soft but sure, filled the space, a heartbeat that echoed in every chest. She paused, then gently added one final line. "And if the sky could speak, I think it would sound a little like today." She let the quiet sit for a second. Maybe two, not because she wanted the applause, but because she wanted the moment to breathe. William was the first to clap. A slow, respectful rhythm, not performative, not royal, just human. Then others joined, kids, adults, teachers, aides. No one rushed, no one shouted. No camera flash blinked through the air. Only the soft shuffle of hands meeting hands in honest appreciation. Amina stepped back with a small nod. Not a bow, not a performance, just a gesture that said, "I shared what I came to share." One of the journalists in the back wiped his glasses. Another scribbled quietly, choosing silence over spectacle. Later, People would say they hadn't cried, but most of them had. Not loudly, not visibly, but in that small corner of the chest where hope lives. She had taken something invisible, something most people never questioned the sky, and turned it into language they could finally hear. That moment would go viral, not because of who she was standing next to, but because of what she'd made everyone feel. The royal event would end. Speeches would follow. Photos would be taken in other rooms. But her voice, the one that didn't come from sight, but from seeing, would linger. It had risen like a song, and settled like truth. She couldn't see the sky, but now, the sky had finally heard her voice. It began quietly, a ripple on a pond. A local education reporter wrote a piece titled, "The Girl Who Showed the Sky Without Eyes." By morning, it had found its way to national papers. By evening, it had crossed borders. The story of a blind girl whose words left a room in royal silence was too powerful to ignore. Headlines spread across the UK. Amina's poem brings Prince to tears. A voice beyond sight. Talk shows replayed the moment. Radio hosts read her lines aloud with reverence. "The sun has no shape," one whispered on air, "but I still feel its warmth." Schools in Scotland paused morning classes to let students hear her poem. And in homes far beyond Britain, strangers felt a lump rise in their throat over a girl they had never met. Then came the letters. The first was from a retired teacher in Wales. "I taught for 40 years and never heard anything so honest." Then came an email from New Zealand. "My daughter is blind. She never liked poems until she heard yours." Packages arrived, 2 books, drawings, Braille postcards, all addressed simply, "Amina, the girl who sees without eyes." No surname, no address, but they all found her. From Nairobi to Toronto, blind children began writing their own poems. Videos surfaced of students reading Amina's lines in classrooms. Amina had written for herself, but now her words belonged to everyone. She had become a mirror, showing the world what it had failed to see for so long. And then something bigger happened. In Parliament, a proposal was brought forth quietly at first, but it didn't stay quiet for long. The story had reached someone who believed it shouldn't end in applause. It should begin in action. Within days, funding was approved for a new literacy initiative dedicated entirely to visually impaired children across the UK. Braille resources, audio tools, creative writing workshops. Its name? The Amina Project. Journalists tried to reach her again. Cameras waited outside the school. But Amina didn't speak, not yet. She was still writing, still listening. One reporter caught up with Prince William weeks later at a veterans event. Amid a flurry of questions, someone asked if he remembered the poem. He looked up, expression soft. "Some lessons," he said, "don't come from professors. They come from poets in Braille." It was all he said. That clip spread across the world. It played in classrooms, conference rooms, even church halls. The words were stitched into banners, carved onto plaques, and etched into the hearts of thousands. But Amina, she was still in her little room, still dreaming. She'd written something true and the world had listened, and yet none of it felt real. Not the letters, the news, the program in her name. Not until she stepped onto a very different stage. Amina didn't set out to change the world, she only wanted to be heard. But in hearing her, the world found a voice that changed everything. The hall was larger than anything she'd ever imagined. It wasn't just the ceiling or the polished wood that caught the light, it was the hush, a shared reverence. Flags from every nation lined the room, but all eyes were on the girl who couldn't see them. Amina stood calmly behind the microphone. She wore the same quiet confidence she'd carried from her small school in rural England. Only now her voice reached further. She didn't read from a Braille card this time. She had memorized her words, felt them, lived them. "My name is Amina," she said, her voice clear, "and I believe imagination is a kind of vision." There was no shuffle in the crowd, just stillness. "I was born blind, but I was never born without sight. I've seen the kindness of hands. I've seen the power of questions. And I've learned that when we include everyone in learning, our world doesn't get smaller. It gets wider." She paused, breathing in the silence. "Education that leaves people out, leaves the world incomplete." A few heads nodded. One, Woman near the front brushed away a tear. But Amina didn't speak for sympathy. She spoke for change. Storytelling let me find the stars in a sky I'll never see. But I don't need to see light to know it's there. And I don't need to see people to believe in them. There was a quiet intake of breath across the panel. Inclusive classrooms aren't a favor. They're a mirror for all of us. They teach us how to listen when it's hard, to trust when it's unfamiliar, and to dream, even when the world forgets how. A short beep signaled her final minute. She smiled. And if you're wondering what a blind girl can teach a room full of world leaders, I'd say imagination is stronger than sight. And every child, no matter where they're from or how they learn, carries something the world needs. She stepped back. The applause began slowly. But it built not in volume, but in depth. Not for performance, but for purpose. Later that evening, as she waited backstage, her translator handed her a small audio device. A message just arrived. From London. She pressed play. William's voice came through, gentle and proud. Amina, the sky you described, it's reaching everywhere now. I hope you know that. You didn't just change one life. You're reshaping what people believe is possible. Her lips curled into a quiet smile. She didn't need medals. She didn't need flashbulbs. She had something louder. Her words, her truth, her journey. And beyond the microphones, the cameras, and the speeches, one thing remained unchanged. She had never seen the world. But today, the world had seen her. From a quiet girl no one looked at twice to a voice the world couldn't look away from. Amina stepped through the school gates the way you step into a memory, softly, carefully, like it might break under your feet. It had been years since she last touched the bricks of this place, but the air still smelled the same. A little chalk, a little grass, a little something unspoken. Children's voices echoed faintly down the hallway, but something had changed. She could feel it before anyone said a word. They took her hand and led her toward the east wing, where the old dusty resource room used to be. That room had always been forgotten, barely used, left behind. But now it had a new sign above the door. Raised letters in Braille, smooth silver, and under it, just one name. Amina's Room of Wonder. Inside, it wasn't quiet anymore. It was alive. There were shelves with books that whispered through fingertips, speakers that told stories with warmth, poetry printed in dots and etched in sound. Young students sat on cushions, laughing as they explored shapes and textures, tracing stories into the air. One boy ran his fingers over a carved wooden sun and said softly, "It feels like a smile." Amina stood still, breathing it in. She heard a familiar voice, her old teacher, Ms. Elsie. "We built it with your poem in mind. You showed us how to teach beyond sight." Amina didn't have words at first, only silence, the kind that holds everything in it. She reached out and hugged her, then hugged another teacher, and another. In a corner near the window, a soft voice called out, "Amina?" It was Layla, her best friend from those blurry, bright days. Still the same warmth in her voice, still the same easy laugh. They held each other, and time folded like a paper bird. A group of students gathered around her, full of questions and wonder. One asked what sight looked like in dreams. Another asked if she still wrote poems. Amina smiled, then knelt down and placed a hand over her chest. "I still write," she said gently, "but now I know imagination is the only sight that grows." The words landed with a hush, the kind of hush that holds weight. Her teachers stood nearby, tears in their eyes. Even the walls seemed to lean in, listening. Amina wasn't the girl who left searching anymore. She had come back carrying something far bigger than answers. She touched the doorway one last time before leaving, fingertips lingering on the Braille letters. But there was one last surprise, one that would bring everything together. Sometimes we leave places with wounds. But when we return with purpose, we don't just heal, we help others see. It arrived in a simple wooden crate. No ribbons, no press release, just a quiet knock at the door and a delivery man who said, "For Miss Amina." Her father signed for it with a puzzled look, but she already knew. There was something familiar about how gently the box had been sealed. Something intentional. They opened it together. Inside, wrapped in soft linen, was a sculpture unlike anything she or anyone had ever seen. It wasn't meant to be looked at. It was meant to be felt. There were smooth ridges, tiny fans that stirred soft breezes across her fingertips, thin, raised arcs shaped like clouds, a textured spiral that pulsed gently beneath her hand, warm like sunlight on skin. And when she leaned in close, there was the faintest vibration like distant thunder, rumbling softly inside, a world only she could touch. Her breath caught. She moved her fingers across the sculpture slowly, exploring each detail like it was the edge of a memory just beginning to form. Her father watched from a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, pretending not to wipe his eyes. There was a card, tucked neatly beneath the base. She felt for the braille. "Dear Amina, you gave the sky your voice. Now I hope you can feel its voice in return. With admiration, William," and beneath that, one final line. "Now you can feel the sky, any time." Her hands rested on the sculpture's core. A breeze slipped between her fingers, tiny, real, alive. She smiled. Not a wide one. Not for show, but something smaller, deeper. Like something inside her had just exhaled. The room was silent, but it didn't feel quiet. It felt full. For a long moment no one spoke. Her father cleared his throat softly. "He really did this? Just for you?" She nodded. Then she whispered, "He listened." And that was all. She didn't need to ask why he remembered. She already knew. Some words aren't just heard, they stay. William hadn't just sent her a gift. He'd created a sky she could touch. A sky that could meet her where she lived. Not in sight, but in story. Not in vision, but in feeling. The sculpture sat on her windowsill now, catching the quiet light of early evening. Each breeze it gave reminded her of the poem she once read. The sky isn't only what we see. It's what we carry. And now she carried it in her hands. The sky had never been closer. He never forgot her words. And now she'd never forget his. Amina's words didn't stop with a poem. They turned into stories. Small stories. Big stories. Quiet ones that whispered across fingertips in braille. Bright ones that came alive through sound and touch. She began writing for children who, like her, had once been told the world was a place they couldn't fully know. Now, she was writing to prove otherwise. Her books traveled farther than her feet ever had. Into schools in South Africa, into libraries, in Japan, into homes in villages where sight wasn't common, but wonder still bloomed. She created characters who flew without wings, who painted with sound, who dreamed in patterns and feelings and movement. For Amina, this was more than writing, it was giving language to a world many thought was invisible. And still, her question echoed. It had once been spoken in a soft, trembling voice. "If I can't see the sky, does that mean it doesn't belong to me?" That single question didn't just open minds, it opened doors. Countries began investing in sensory learning programs, not just in the UK but everywhere. Tactile poetry kits were introduced in Brazil. Audio-tactile storytelling was launched in schools across India. A global coalition was formed to bring sensory-based education to places that had never even had a word for it. And at the center of it all was a little girl whose voice had reminded the world to listen. Years later, Prince William visited a school for blind children in Northern Ireland. As he walked through the classrooms, he paused beside a student tracing raised letters. He smiled gently and said to a teacher nearby, "I was once asked the bravest question I've ever heard. It came from a young girl, and I think I've been answering it ever since. Some stories don't fade, they ripple, and Amina's story became one of them. She never became famous in the way most people imagine. No interviews, no book tours, no speeches under bright lights. But her stories sat on shelves where children reached without fear. Her poems became songs that helped others find their own rhythm. She didn't need to see the world to change it. She only needed the courage to speak when silence seemed safer. Amina often said, "True sight isn't about what we see, it's about what we help others feel." And for those who had once felt invisible, her voice was a lighthouse. She never saw the sky, but she gave it color, shape, meaning. Not with her eyes, but with something much deeper. And sometimes The sky listens too. Amina's question didn't end with an answer, it sparked a movement. Because when one voice dares to speak, the truth, the world doesn't just hear it, it changes.